Hey, let's talk about Yellowstone. You've probably heard the wild stories, how it's a ticking time bomb ready to blow and wipe out half the continent, or how it's overdue for a cataclysmic eruption that'll end life as we know it. The internet loves to hype this stuff up, and Hollywood doesn't help with its disaster flick fantasies. But here's the thing. A lot of what you've heard about the Yellowstone Supervolcano is straight up wrong, like wildly off base. So, grab a coffee, sit back, and let's dig into the truth behind 7 of the biggest myths about this geological wonder. I promise, by the end, you'll see Yellowstone in a whole new light, not as a doomsday machine, but as a fascinating, complex part of our planet. You've seen the headlines, right? Yellowstone Supervolcano ready to blow, or scientists warn of imminent eruption. They're everywhere, and they're designed to make you panic. The truth? Yellowstone is not about to erupt. Let's break it down. The idea of an imminent eruption comes from a misunderstanding of how volcanoes work. Yellowstone is a supervolcano, sure, but it's not sitting there like a cartoon bomb with a lit fuse. The U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, which monitors Yellowstone like a hawk, says there's no evidence of an eruption coming anytime soon. The volcano's been quiet for about 70,000 years since its last major eruption, and while it's geologically active, think geysers, hot springs, and the occasional earthquake, that doesn't mean it's gearing up for a catastrophe. Here's the kicker. Volcanoes don't follow a schedule. The notion that Yellowstone is due for an eruption ignores how geological time works. We're talking millions of years, not a countdown clock. This one's a fan favorite. People love saying Yellowstone is overdue because it's erupted roughly every 600,000 to 800,000 years, and the last big one was about 640,000 years ago. Sounds like we're late for the apocalypse, right? Wrong. Geological cycles aren't like catching a bus. They're not precise and they don't run on a timetable. The gaps between Yellowstone's past super eruptions, there have been 3 major ones, about 2.1 million, 1.3 million, and 640,000 years ago, aren't a strict pattern. They're averages, and nature doesn't care about averages. Plus, those eruptions were driven by complex processes deep in the earth, like magma chamber refilling, which we can't predict with a calendar. Scientists at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, YVO, use tools like GPS, seismometers, and satellite imagery to track ground deformation and seismic activity. Right now, everything's within normal limits. There's some uplift and subsidence, ground moving up or down, due to magma and hydrothermal activity, but it's been happening for decades without any sign of an impending eruption. So no, Yellowstone isn't overdue. It's just doing its thing, and that thing isn't blowing up anytime soon. Hollywood's got a lot to answer for here. Movies like 2012 paint Yellowstone as a continent killer, with ash clouds swallowing cities and lava flows turning America into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Let's get real. A super eruption would be bad, but it's not going to wipe out the entire U.S. If Yellowstone did have a super eruption, and again the odds are vanishingly small, the impacts would depend on a lot of factors like wind patterns and eruption size. The immediate area, within a few dozen miles, would be hit hardest. Think lava flows, pyroclastic surges, superhot gas and heavy ash fall. Places like Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho could see significant damage, with ash blanketing the ground and making life miserable. Further out, the Midwest might get a few inches of ash, which could disrupt farming and infrastructure. Ash is heavy, abrasive, and bad for engines and lungs, so yeah, it'd be a mess. But the East and West coasts? They'd likely see little to no direct impact. The global climate might cool a bit for a few years due to ash and sulfur in the atmosphere, similar to what happened after Mount Pinatubo erupted in 1991. But we're not talking Mad Max levels of chaos. Compare that to the hype. Some claim a Yellowstone eruption would kill millions instantly and render the U.S. uninhabitable. Nope. The USGS says even a worst-case scenario would cause regional disruption, not national annihilation. And here's some perspective. Smaller volcanoes like Mount St. Helens in 1980 caused localized devastation but didn't end the world. Yellowstone's bigger, but it's not a death ray. When people hear supervolcano, they picture Armageddon. But Yellowstone's history isn't just a series of world-ending explosions. The volcano has had 3 super eruptions, yes, but it's also had dozens of smaller eruptions over millions of years. Not every rumble is a catastrophe. The last super eruption, 640,000 years ago, formed the Lava Creek Tuff and left behind the massive Yellowstone caldera we see today. It was huge, ejecting about 1,000 cubic kilometers of material. But since then, Yellowstone's had smaller events, like lava flows and minor ash eruptions, that were far less dramatic. The most recent volcanic activity, about 70,000 years ago, was a relatively tame lava flow. The point is, Yellowstone's not a one-trick pony. It can erupt in different ways, and most of them aren't apocalyptic. The YVO notes that smaller eruptions or hydrothermal explosions, where underground water flashes to steam, are far more likely than a super eruption. So, while the big one gets all the attention, it's not the whole story. Old Faithful's shooting water into the sky, the ground's steaming, and the earth shakes now and then. It's easy to see why people think this means Yellowstone's ready to pop. But those geysers and hot springs, they're just Yellowstone being Yellowstone. The park's geothermal features are powered by a massive heat source, the same magma chamber that fuels the supervolcano. But they're not a sign of an imminent eruption. They're more like pressure valves, releasing heat and steam in a controlled way. Think of it as the volcano letting off a little steam, literally, rather than building up to a big bang. Earthquakes are another piece of the puzzle. Yellowstone gets thousands of small quakes every year, most too tiny to feel. They're caused by tectonic shifts and hydrothermal fluids moving underground, not a magma chamber about to burst. The YVO tracks these quakes closely, and there's no unusual activity suggesting an eruption is near. In fact, those geysers and quakes have been happening for centuries without a super eruption. They're just part of the park's charm. Yellowstone gets a lot of flack for being a supervolcano, but is it really the world's most dangerous? Not by a long shot. The most dangerous label depends on what you mean by danger. Likelihood of eruption, potential impact, or proximity to people. Globally, there are other volcanoes with more immediate risks. Take Campi Flegrei in Italy, a caldera near Naples that's shown recent unrest and sits under a densely populated area. Or consider Mount Vesuvius, also in Italy, which buried Pompeii in 79 AD and still threatens millions nearby. In Indonesia, Mount Tambora's 1815 eruption caused a year without a summer and killed tens of thousands. These volcanoes are active, close to people, and have a history of deadly eruptions. Yellowstone, by contrast, is in a sparsely populated area. Even a super eruption wouldn't directly threaten as many lives as an eruption in, say, Naples or Jakarta. Plus, its low eruption probability makes it less of a concern than more active volcanoes. The USGS ranks Yellowstone as a high threat, but not the highest. Volcanoes like Kilauea in Hawaii or Mount Rainier in Washington have higher threat scores due to their activity and proximity to population centers. This myth paints Yellowstone as an unstoppable force, with humanity helpless in its wake. Not true. While we can't stop a volcano from erupting, we can prepare for it, and scientists are already on the case. The YVO, a collaboration between the USGS, the National Park Service, and the University of Utah, monitors Yellowstone 24/7. They use seismometers to detect earthquakes, GPS to measure ground movement, and gas sensors to track volcanic gases like carbon dioxide. If something weird starts happening, like a sudden spike in quakes or rapid ground uplift, they'll know, and they'll sound the alarm. Preparation goes beyond monitoring. Emergency plans exist for evacuating nearby areas if needed. Ashfall maps help predict where debris might land, so communities can stockpile supplies or reinforce infrastructure. Farmers can plan for crop losses, and airlines can reroute flights to avoid ash clouds. Even individuals can prepare by learning about volcanic hazards and keeping emergency kits ready. The key is that Yellowstone's not a sneaky ninja. It's not going to erupt without warning. Scientists expect weeks, months, or even years of noticeable activity, like increased quakes or ground swelling, before a major eruption. That gives us time to act, not just sit around waiting for doom. Yellowstone's a geological marvel, but it's not the apocalyptic monster it's made out to be. The myths, imminent eruptions, overdue clocks, continent-wide destruction, stem from a mix of misunderstanding, exaggeration, and good old Hollywood drama. The truth is way less scary, but just as fascinating. Yellowstone's active, sure, but it's been that way for millions of years, chugging along with its geysers and quakes without blowing its top. Scientists are watching it closely, and the odds of a super eruption in our lifetime are basically nil. So next time you hear someone freaking out about Yellowstone, you can set them straight. It's not a doomsday device, it's a natural wonder, doing what it's done for eons. And honestly, that's pretty cool. Want to dive deeper? Check out the USGS's Yellowstone Volcano Observatory website for the latest data. It's way more exciting than the myths.